Welcome to Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel. I am a psychological astrologer, and I'm so happy to have Brigit Finklaire back with us today. Now, Brigit is an author. She's a healer, a spiritual teacher, and oh well, she just has so many strings to her bow. Welcome, Brigit.
Thank you, Anna, for having me back. It's absolutely lovely to be here and to see you again. Thank you
Well,
for the introduction as well.
I thought that it would be fun to have a look at your astrocartography this time round, because
Mm.
you're here. We had a look at your chart, and so the first thing I noticed is that there's not a whole lot going on through London, and in fact, even it's not so obvious through Cape Town. But I did notice that the further west you went in the UK, the closer Venus got to your midheaven, which is the line to do with career. And Venus being the goddess of love and beauty. And I just wondered whether, when you did live, I believe you said you lived in Leamington Spa
Hmm.
for a time, which is further west than London, whether perhaps you felt that you found it a little bit easier in terms of interacting with people, whether there was a friendliness, opportunities that kind of presented themselves as a result of that.
Yeah, it was a really interesting time because I had a premature baby who was 3 weeks old when I moved to Leamington Spa from London, and all of my friends and family were my family were in the south, and my friends were in London. My career, everything I knew was in London. And I suddenly go to live in Leamington Spa, which I'd never really known, I'd never been to, I didn't know anybody there. And I had this 3 week old premature baby. And my ex-husband had chosen the house. So there was a lot of work to be done on this house, and it wouldn't have been the house that I would have chosen. But putting me into that very challenging situation actually did bring out some really good things, because what happened is I joined the NCT. My neighbour was wonderful. She was about my age, a little bit older maybe, had a couple of children. And then she was the one who said, you need to join the NCT, and this is where they meet. And she really helped me. And then I got to know these two other women who'd moved from London. And then from then we got to know other people. And so it was sort of like, I didn't work when I was there. And I kind of did that, spent 2 years that I was living there doing up this house. Just it was in a terrible state, so that we could actually sell it and move back to London 2 years later. And I brought up my daughter there and was launched into motherhood and got to know these women. Unfortunately, haven't kept in touch with any of them. But in that regard, it was a time of nurturing, if you like, and heart space and friendliness, because prior to that I'd been in the big bad world of work and the competitive sort of environment of working in public relations, where you're always watching your back. And okay, I had friends, but it was sort of going out drinking friends and London friends and partying friends. So this was a very different thing, that sort of groups of mothers who were looking after their children. So in that regard it was. And also because we lived far away from friends and family, we did have people come to visit and then they'd stay with us. So that was also this kind of nurturing space of becoming a mother, really, and making that massive change from being a career woman to being a mother. So
Yeah,
well, yeah.
it's interesting because we associate the MC with career and with our where we are in the world, in public, etc. And what happened there was that you relocated to an area where you became less visible in the big wide world, but actually more visible because within your community and through networking, etc.
Yeah. Interesting you should talk about the West, because there was a sort of one of those crossroads moments in my life before I trained as a therapist, um, when the children were little and I wanted to move to Bristol. My ex actually came from Bristol and I just liked Bristol because it was still a city, but not as big and dirty and dusty and anonymous as London. But it still had, a culture and a university and theatres. Plus, you could get out easily to the West Country, and I love the countryside around there. Anyway, it never happened. For one reason or another, it didn't happen, and I stayed in London, and then ended up training and completely changing my career. But I was always drawn to the West Country.
Yeah, it's that pull, isn't it? That pull west
Yeah.
that we get sometimes when there are nice lines going through a particular area. We don't even know why. We just feel that pull
Yeah.
in that direction. So it's very interesting to hear you say that, because that's exactly what I would expect to see. But I then changed and did a relocation chart. I changed tack and did a relocation chart for Cape Town, where you now live. So I just need to find this chart, which I appear to have misplaced. If you bear with me.
Absolutely. And while you're looking for that, I was just going to say my
Found it.
parents always lived in the West Country, and my brother lives in Dorset. My father lives in Dorset now. And when I go back to England, I always go to London to see my friends, and then I always go to the West Country. And then my very best friend lives on the Devon-Cornwall border. And I love going to see him. My daughter used to live in Devon. She's moved now to Costa Rica. It's quite a long way west, but yeah,
Yes, but yeah,
interesting.
it's that part of the United Kingdom
Yeah.
where you've got that line going through. So now I did this relocation chart for Cape Town, wondering what it meant. And interestingly, when you were born, there was a heap, a very non-technical term, a heap of planets, all in your ninth house. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 planets in your ninth house. In fact, is that correct? No, sorry, it's shifted. It's Cape Town where you've got them all in your ninth house. But in your natal chart, there are 4. So what's the contrast? Okay, so the difference is the ninth house is very much about travel. It's very much about philosophy, understanding. But interestingly, you've got 3 planets also sitting in your 8th house, which is all the deep work of, psychology and understanding the depths of your psyche and everybody else's psyche. It's about everything that's shared resources. And it's very serious. It's heavy, whereas the ninth house is, well, much sunnier, shall we say. So we relocate to Cape Town, this chart. And in fact, almost those 3 planets that were in the 8th house, 2 of them have shifted into the ninth. That's why the ninth now gets so full. So basically, you're having the immigrant experience, with it there. Saturn remains in the 8th, so that you still have this need to dig and go deep. That you haven't lost all the seriousness. But perhaps it's a much more metaphysical focus on your chart. The interesting thing is that Venus now shifts from the 9th into your 10th house. So it's similar in a sense to what was going on in the West Country. So my feeling here is, and see, I want to talk now about the bone circle, because that's about bringing people together, is it not?
Yes.
So
To some degree, yes, because it's a circle and you can't do it on your own, really.
exactly, yeah. And that's what I'm thinking. So here it is again, it's a very similar impulse, which is it goes beyond being a one-to-one therapist. It's about bringing everything together into one thing. So how does the bone circle work then?
Okay, just before I go into the bone circle, I also want to say that everything in my life has gone into that whole sense of community and fellowship, if you like, because also my other spiritual teaching is all about the family unit, the spiritual family unit working together and growing together. So that's also there. And then I have a blended family because I have a stepson as well, although my children don't live here. But so there's lots of that kind of group thing. But let's focus, as you said, on the bone circle. So even just finding the name, the bone circle, was an intuitive process. So I walked my talk and used some the processes that I teach in the bone circle to come up with the name. And when I was sort of in my, what I would call I talk about the small self and the greater self. And the small self is really the ego or the identity or the programming, all the stuff that happened to us, the conditioning. And then the greater self is sort of the luminous self or the soul self or the spiritual self that's here for great purpose, and sees the much bigger picture. And most people think that they are the small self and have a greater self, but what we're teaching the bone circle is the other way around. You are a greater self and you have a small self. So I thought it was going to be, I don't know what I thought it was going to be. I just thought it was going to be something to do with intuition and alchemy or something highfalutin, and it ended up being the bone circle. And at the time, I wasn't sure when it came out. I actually did this with my daughter because she's also trained. And I just knew, because part of what I teach in the bone circle is things have a ring of truth that goes beyond our logical understanding. So the logical understanding is very much the domain of that ego self. And the ego self's going, oh no, it can't be called the bone circle. That's much too earthy and grounded and witchy. Oh no, it can't be called that. It's got to be called this. But if you listen to the ring of truth about it, your hairs go, your goosebumps go. There's something in you that knows it's true. And I just knew bone circle was true. And it's turned out to be the best name I could possibly have had. And just explaining how I called it the bone circle tells you a little bit about the training, because it's about understanding. It's that know thyself. Know not just your small self, but your greater self. Understand your soul self, what your soul purpose is, what you're here to do, what you love, what your passions are, what lifts you up and fills you out and brings you nourishment, what your true north is, where you're heading. But it's also know your small self, your conditioning, what you're programmed to believe, your limiting beliefs that you have about yourself, the thoughts and feelings and the sabotage that stops you, and to listen to the intuitive voice of the greater self and know that it's your true north and feel that ring of truth and go for it. So it's like that ship at sea that's, if it's a couple of degrees off, it's going to hit the wrong place. And very often in identity or programmed small egoic self, we kind of know what we want to do, but the small self goes, oh no, it's a bit like you decide to set up a business and the government comes out and goes, oh, I can tell you how to do that. And you go, no, thank you. You're going to bring in all this red tape. And that's what the small self is like. Oh, well, I know the best way of doing that. What you need to do is read this book and do that. And you need to save some money and you need to, and the greater self doesn't do that. So but you can't do that alone, because unfortunately, we are so programmed and conditioned that the smaller self, whose job it is to keep you safe, you'll know this as a hypnotherapist, the job of the subconscious mind is to keep you safe, will always try to keep you in your comfort zone and will always go, no, but you can't do that. You can't write a book, whatever it is. So it eventually is like the mists of Avalon and it will cave in. And so the idea with this work is that you keep it very clean. You can do it for yourself. There's lots of techniques you can do for yourself and you can work with your own intuition and you can take that path. But it's quite a dangerous thing to take that path on your own. And I talk a lot in the Bone Circle about the hero's journey. And the hero's and the heroine's journey as well. But the hero's journey is Joseph Campbell's monomyth, actually, and we go through the stages of it. We go into it in a lot of depth, but it maps our psyche We understand it on a deep, deep resonant level. So if we look at films and books which are hugely, hugely popular, like Harry Potter, for example, or The Matrix, or Star Wars, which is probably the biggest selling film of all time, they're all based on the hero's journey. Now, if you look at the heroes in those, or even the myths, Greek myths, those sorts of things, if you look at those films, that person never does it. Harry Potter does not do that whole hero's journey on his own. In fact, he can't do it on his own. He needs Hermione and Ron and all the other cast of people at Hogwarts to be able to face all his fears, grow, mature, and overcome Voldemort. And if you look at Lord of the Rings, he can't do it on his own. He has to have his friend that Sam, I think it is, that takes the ring off him because the ring is consuming him. And that's a little bit how the ego is when you set out to create what you would love and what is your purpose. The little ego goes in and decides that you can't do that. So you need your friends around you to take that journey. And so within the Bone Circle, originally it was designed only for women. And so they were Bone Sisters, spelled Sistahs. And there was a reason for that. And I think I might change it with this, a star. But they were Bone Sisters, and you would always work with your Bone Sisters because they keep you on the straight and narrow when you were panicking, because that's actually what happens. It's like the intuition says, oh, you're going to give up your hugely successful therapy practice in Harley Street. You're going to resign. You're going to rent out your beautiful flat that's taken you ages to furnish and look wonderful to a group of students. And you're going to go off to a country that you've never set foot in before, that, by the way, everybody's saying is dangerous. And of course, your small self is panicking. I remember absolutely panicking that I was throwing my life away. I was ruining my life. But you have, and that's when you need your friends to kind of cheer you on and go, no, it's okay, it's true, no, it's true, this is true, you need to keep going. Otherwise you sabotage yourself. So this is why we work with other people. And that's why it's so important that it's a group, because when somebody's going through those fears, they need their bone sisters. And in fact, it will end up being, I don't know what I'm going to call it, because it's going to be a mixed group from now on. I have a suspicion that it will be mostly women that want to do the training anyway, but I know that there are a couple of men that would like to do it as well. But maybe it's, I don't know what I'm going to call it. Bone partners or something like that. But you need those people to work with. And what we do within the Bone Circle is there's a whole, it's actually hugely complicated, by the way. Sorry, it goes all over the place. And I do an introduction for free because I think that people need, and it's a 3-hour introduction, to really understand what this flipping thing is about before they can actually decide whether they want to do it or not. So I give all kinds of practical solutions and stories and show how it works. Because essentially what you're doing is, we work with these things called the bones as well. And the bones are like the structure underneath that, and they're truth bombs, if you like, that we understand. So we get to know both the small self and the greater self. That's the kind of first stage. Then we go on these heroes and heroines journeys, because the minute you decide, I'm going to come out of my comfort zone and create something that my soul resonates with, that I've come here to do, that I would love, love, love to do. The minute you do that, your comfort zone goes, no, you can't do that. And your programmed smaller self goes, no. So we sabotage ourselves. So we've got to overcome that. So we've got to also detach from some of the thoughts and feelings we have. So you'll know this as a therapist. I talk a lot about the iceberg, how we only see the tip of the iceberg and a lot of it is subconscious or unconscious. So those things are going to come up to be healed because you're pushing against something, because you've been living, say, this life. It's the classic, I want to be a lion tamer thing. You know, I'm an accountant and I want to be a lion tamer. But the minute you decide you're going to be a lion tamer, the little accountant goes, no, 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 you can't do that. That's far too dangerous, and pulls you back. So there's these 3 parts to the Bone Circle. There's the absolutely understanding that you have a smaller self and a greater self, and that there are these universal truths that you can live by. And that's how we seed the training, if you like. That is kind of coupled with tapping into your intuition at will. And there's a whole meditation to be able to do that. And then you have that and you can access it instantly. Working with other people to keep you on track so that you know what your true north is and what your truth is to create. And this only comes later in the more advanced trainings. And it's called the gift of life. So there's a meditation where you are given the gift of the true life you've come to live, and then you bring it to life. And in bringing it to life, you go into service and you help others and you gift it into the world. So there's this whole notion of gift, of love, truth, and service, which is the structure of your greatness, which is a trinity. So you work with this love, truth, and service. So that's part of the bone circle. But in going on that hero's journey to go for what you love, to really live all across your areas of your life, so it's the relationship, the work, the friendships, the place you want to live, everything in your life, in going for that, stuff's going to come up for you. Then you've got to have the tools to deal with those. So we're also looking at, okay, what simple tools have we got that we can work with to let go of trauma, to release things, to let go of the past, to do a bit of child inside work, to just process things that are coming up, and to look at things in a different way, to reframe. So simple therapy, clean therapy techniques are coming in, and they get more complex as you train, and that's over the different 5 levels of the bone circle. And then in doing both of those, one is you're looking at the future that's already mapped out on some level, because in another dimension, there's no such thing as time. So it's as if that's already, and we know that there's, in quantum physics, there are many possibilities in the quantum field. There's lots and lots of paths you could take in the future. So it's showing you the path that your soul and your greater self have come here to take and would love to take, the one that will fill you up and make you just joyous. It doesn't mean you're going to be happy all your life, because there's all sorts of stuff in the shadow that's going to come up. But so the one is looking at this future, and it's only giving you one bit at a time. It's not giving you what's going to happen for the next 10 years. It's just giving you what's going to happen for the next 9 months to a year. May give you some bits further out that you're going for. And it's reorienting you towards that pathway to work with these things and all of your inherent skills, talents, passions, and the rest of it, some of which are latent, you don't know about, some you've always known about, never dismissed or whatever. So that's future oriented. And then looking at these things that are coming up and going, they're hitting you in the face. The programming, the conditioning that says you can't do that, you're not good enough, you can't trust people, you have to control it, or whatever the thing is. There are 12 key core beliefs that I work with. You have to be able to unhook that. And in the midst of all of that, you have to be able to sit centered and grounded. And that's where we look at some of the metaphysical stuff of how do we center and ground and be still and come into the now and observe and be mindful and not get swayed by everything that's going on.
So what I feel here then is that much of this was in you already, and that because, as I, you had 4 planets in the 9th house, and the 9th house is everything that you are talking about, the hero's journey, the understanding of archetype, the understanding of spirituality, the need for spirituality, the wanting to place the person within the context of their spirituality, helping them to connect. The teaching, all of that is already very much the 9th house and Pisces, because what we haven't said is that you are a Pisces, and that much of what we're talking about is all happening in the sign of Pisces. In fact, yeah, much of it. So that's already there in your birth chart. And then there's this emphasis on the 8th house, which is the transformation.
Transformation is what the bone circle is
exactly.
about. Yeah.
So all of this is in you, but it feels to me like somehow going to South Africa crystallizes all of this and knits it together. And that's the shift from the 8th house to the 9th house, and then Venus into the 10th house. And you were talking about the fact that it's been women, and as we know, Venus is a female energy.
Yeah.
And it's your career. So it's like it's shifted everything a little bit more from the 8th. So everything you learned about transformation being taught through the 9th and through now your career path. So what do you think it is about South Africa, as you experience it, that has helped you to knit these ideas?
Yeah, that's a great question. By the way, I just wanted to backtrack about the collective and the bone. You see, if each person does what they need to do to find their soul purpose, then everybody's in their soul purpose, then collectively we move on, which kind of goes right back to our beginning conversation. But in terms of why South Africa, I had no idea why my intuition was leading me to South Africa. So I did a training in London around intuition and tapping into intuition and creating, but it didn't have the other elements within it. But I wanted to, I'm one of these people that has to road test everything to the max. And it got a bit scary when it said, okay, resign, you know, things like that. But actually what's happened is I'd never been to South Africa in my life. I was ridiculously busy and burning out. I went to a family thing where my younger brother, who's a wine taster, really big into wines, he just went, and he'd been to South Africa a lot because he had in-laws here, and he just went, Bridget, and I said, yeah, and he goes, you know, you've always drunk red wine, but you really like Riesling as a white wine. I said, yes, and he goes, and I always knew you'd like Riesling, but I went, yes, and what are you getting at? And he goes, you'll love South Africa, you'll just love Cape Town, you'll absolutely love it, I can tell you. And that was all I really needed, was my brother, my younger brother, who knew me very well, to tell me that I'd love Cape Town. But what's happened in shifting here is, I think I've had past lives here, and because I resonate very, very deeply with South, and I know of at least two past lives I've had here, at least two. One where I was a conscientious objector to the Boer War, which I knew about before I left England years ago, but I never thought about it, and actually ended up going to a place where I knew I'd died, and I had to stop on the roadside and collect that soul and reintegrate it back and send it off and tell it was okay, because it was died in, that person, it was a male, died in shame because it was on the run and he was on the run. So there was that one. And then when I went to Swaziland, which is now called Eswatini, and when I was in Swaziland, we were in the bush and there was a cave, and we knew that there's a lot of, you know, cave activity, but cavemen came from here, and I just was doing some work with the land, doing land readings, and I had a deep knowing that I had also lived many thousands of years ago as a cave person. And I suspect that there's also more lives in the middle of those two that I've kind of picked up, because I deeply, deeply resonate with the land, and I love it here. And the energy of the land is completely different. I feel held. It's like being held in the hand of God. Whereas England, I always felt was like deep, composted down energy that was pulling me down. I love the countryside here. I love the big open skies and the big open space, and it somehow opens my vista rather than being in London with lots of buildings and not much space. There's also practical issues, like because I rented out my flat initially, I had a big flat in London and I rented it out, which gave me, and especially with the exchange rate and the cost of living here, it enabled me to live without having to work at all, which was an enormous freedom to be able to just walk on a beach and sit and meditate and recover and do nothing. And except for the only thing I did do was my Keys of Enoch work, which was quite big here. And I used to go every Thursday and every other Tuesday evening to a class. And there was a couple of magical alchemical connections that I made. But otherwise, my life was pretty just, it was like being on a long extended holiday. I arrived in the summer, it was hot, sunny, I didn't have to do anything. And it enabled me as well, as a therapist, you're always dealing with everybody else's problem, but often they're mirroring what you've got, something in your own life, and you think, oh, I've got that as well, I should really do that on myself, and you never do. And I think what the other thing, being able to stop and live on my own, that was the other thing, I was living on my own, so I wasn't looking after my children, they stayed in England. I wasn't with anybody here then, hadn't met my husband then, and didn't really know anybody, and it gave me an enormous amount of time, not only to recover and think and daydream and be on a beach, but also to see things in my own shadow that needed resolving. And I've got a great sort of network of people that I can call upon to work with. And I met a very good psychologist and healer here as well, and we do swaps and things. So it enabled me to clear yet more deeper levels of shadow within myself that had probably stopped me moving on. And it also enabled me to really, really understand this intuitive work and assimilate it and work with it and see how it worked and see what worked and what didn't work. And then, so that was also an opening. And so there was a massive journey of a healing of the child within, the wounded child, I guess. Massive, massive journey of healing.
what really struck me is ninth house people are all about freedom. And just shifting your chart a little bit and bringing almost everything into your ninth house, what you got there was freedom.
Yeah,
Because
completely.
it stripped away the heaviness, because you were talking about, when you're in England, things, you feel dragged down. I think that's your eighth house. And it's the juxtaposition, I think, between the eighth house, which is so heavy, and the ninth house, which just wants to be light. And so it just shifted everything. And when it did that, it liberated you and allowed you to find yourself and your voice and your direction and everything that you needed. So I think that's the answer.
So I just wanted to interpose there. There's another thing that we work with in the bone circle. We work a lot with underlying structures and how important structures are in your life, because a structure will create something. So if you think about, say, just a gutter on your roof, the water will flow where the gutter is. And if you can't move the flow of that water unless you move the gutter, it means you're changing the underlying structure. Now, the underlying structure of London is about busy, 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 busy. It's go, go, go. It's the city. It's make money. It's be successful. It's go out and party. It's full on busy. And even when I go back to London now, I haven't been for a couple of years because of all the lockdown, but even when I go back to London now, I get back into busy mode. I start walking twice as fast as I normally do. It's like, everything's really busy. The nature and structure of Cape Town is it's a seaside town in the sun with a big mountain. And there's lots of people doing sports. There's lots of people doing cycling or walking or hill hiking or paragliding or surfing or swimming or whatever. So everybody's focused on their leisure, being out in the sunshine, and it's a much, much, much slower pace. So I think the underlying structure of Cape Town also allowed me to have that sense of liberation from the very busy, fast, and push that got to be successful, got to keep doing this, got to earn the money, got to do, got. That treadmill life that I had in London, the structure of Cape Town also enabled me to get off that treadmill. So it was a whole combination of things coming together that allowed that.
Just lastly, it also struck me interestingly that when you left London to go west in the UK, your pace of life changed there as well.
It is, yeah.
Again, it's that move west when you're in the UK, and in Cape Town, it's the relocation chart that's showing a shift within you. So, well, that's a marvelous insight into astrocartography and your relocation chart, Brigit. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's so interesting. I find these things fascinating, how they all fit together.
They do indeed.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So thank you very much for joining us on Life Astrologer today.
Thank you for having me. It's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much.
And thank you all for watching. Do please remember to subscribe. And also, you can learn more about the Bone Circle because of the interview on In the Light, to which I will put the link on the description box, along with information or the link to Brigit's website, which is
www.brigitfinklaire.com.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brigit, and thank you all for watching. Until next time, goodbye.